Somewhere in your company, there is a document everyone has seen. It hangs in onboarding decks. It is rendered in clean rectangles, each name stacked above the names it commands. The organizational chart. It tells you who reports to whom, who outranks whom, who, in theory, decides. It is also, in the way that matters most, a fiction. Not a lie, a fiction. It describes a structure that exists on paper and a power that does not. Because authority inside an institution does not travel down the lines on that chart, it travels through a second chart, one that is never printed, never published, never acknowledged. A chart drawn not in titles, but in trust, access, and proximity. This is the shadow org chart, and until you can read it, you are negotiating with a map of a country that is not there. The people who run your company are frequently not the people at the top of the visible one. The most consequential figure in a decision often holds a mid-tier title and an unremarkable office. The question is not whether this second structure exists. Researchers have measured it for decades. The question is whether you can see it before it decides your future for you. Consider the most competent person you know who is, nonetheless, stuck. They are not lazy, they are not unintelligent. They have done everything the visible chart rewards. They impressed their manager, they satisfied their stakeholders, they delivered against the formal scorecard. And still, the promotion went elsewhere. The initiative they championed died quietly in a meeting they were not invited to. The reorganization moved them sideways for reasons no one could articulate. What they experienced was not a failure of merit, it was a failure of mapping. They optimized for the wrong structure with total discipline. This is the specific systemic exposure the visible chart creates. It teaches you to spend your finite political capital on the people whose titles suggest authority, and to ignore the people who actually hold it. You pitch the titled owner of a decision. You never learn that the titled owner privately defers to someone 3 rungs down, a person whose quiet objection, raised in a corridor you will never walk through, reversed your proposal before it reached the room. Every professional has been the protagonist of this story at least once. Most never diagnose it correctly. They conclude they were unlucky, or that the system is corrupt, or that they simply need to work harder against a scorecard that was never the real one. The misdiagnosis is the most expensive part, because you cannot correct for a structure you refuse to admit exists. Human institutions have always done this. The pattern is older than the corporation, older than the nation, older than the written contract. The Greeks gave it a face. Among the gods of Olympus, the sovereign powers were obvious. Zeus on his throne, Poseidon over the sea, Hades below. But the god most essential to the functioning of the cosmos held none of those domains. Hermes ruled the boundaries, the roads, the thresholds, the messages, the exchange. He was the only Olympian who moved freely between the heights of Olympus, the surface of the earth, and the kingdom of the dead. He outranked no one, and nothing reached its destination without him. The Greeks understood what corporations forget. The one who controls the channel does not need the throne. West Africa rendered the same insight more sharply. In the Yoruba tradition, no orisha, no god, could be reached directly. Every prayer, every offering, every act of communication between the human and the divine had first to pass through Eshu, keeper of the crossroads. Eshu sat above none of the great powers, yet he was honored first, always, before any other, because he alone opened the way. To neglect the gatekeeper was to have your message never arrive. The senior gods held the rank, Eshu held the access, and access, the tradition insisted, was the deciding currency. Then, humanity built the lesson into a government. In the Chinese imperial court, 2 structures of power ran in parallel. The outer court was the formal bureaucracy, the examined, titled, credentialed officials, the most rigorously selected administrative class in the pre-modern world. The inner court was something else, the eunuchs of the palace, men with no examination rank, no lineage, no title the outer court would recognize as authority. And yet, in dynasty after dynasty, it was the inner court that ruled. The eunuchs controlled the one resource that titles could buy: physical proximity to the emperor and command of the documents that reached him. They decided which memorials he read, in what order, with what framing. The titled mandarins governed the empire on paper. The unranked men, who controlled the emperor's attention, governed it in fact. The eunuchs could not inherit. They could not found a dynasty. They could not leave the palace. They had no future that did not run through the emperor, which is precisely why he trusted them with everything. Hold that against the colleague in your own organization who, for whatever reason, has nowhere else to go. 3 cultures, 3 pantheons of power, one conclusion repeated across every one of them. Rank is the visible structure. Access is the real one. Strip the mythology away, and the mechanism is brutally simple. Power, inside any organization, concentrates wherever information must pass and cannot route around. The person who sits between 2 groups that do not otherwise speak controls the translation between them, and translation is leverage. This is not a metaphor. It is a measurable structural position. So how do you locate it? Not by reading the chart, by reading the behavior. There are 3 diagnostic markers, observable in any organization within weeks. The first marker: who is consulted? Watch a decision form and track precisely whose input is solicited before anyone commits. Not whose approval is required, whose opinion is wanted. These are different people. The titled approver signs, the consulted advisor shapes. Find the names that recur in the consultation phase of decisions that are not formally theirs, and you have found a broker. The second marker: who is feared? Note whose disagreement causes a proposal to pause. Authority on the chart can say no and be overruled. Real power breathes no, and the matter simply ends, quietly, without escalation, because everyone present understands that this particular objection is terminal. Fear is a more honest signal than rank, because fear is calibrated to actual consequence. The third marker: whose nod unblocks. In every stalled initiative, there is a single point of friction that, once cleared, releases the entire process. Identify the person whose informal endorsement consistently functions as that release. They are rarely the most senior person in the room. They are the most structurally central one. Here is the scenario you have already lived. You built a flawless case. You presented it to the executive who owned the decision. They nodded. They seemed convinced. And then, nothing happened. Or worse, the decision returned reversed, with a rationale that matched nothing you had discussed. What occurred in that interval is the entire subject of this analysis. The titled owner took your proposal to the person they actually trust, the unranked advisor whose read they value above their own. And that person, who you never thought to address, who was never in your line of sight, raised the objection that killed it. You did not lose on the merits. You pitched the visible structure, and the decision was made in the shadow one. Note the accountability vacuum that produces. The person who shaped the outcome bears none of the formal responsibility for it. And consider the inverse, which is more uncomfortable. You have almost certainly been the titled owner of a decision that someone else made for you. You signed it. You announced it in the meeting as your own. You have, until this sentence, believed you decided it. The behavioral science is unambiguous. We are wired to confuse formal status with actual influence, because status is legible and influence is not. The chart is cognitively cheap. The network is cognitively expensive. So we default to the chart, and the people who have learned to read the network perform a quiet structural arbitrage against everyone who has not, every day. This is where most analysis stops, at diagnosis. The recognition that the network exists is not a tool. It is only the precondition for one. The discipline that formalized this is network theory, and it gives us two precise instruments. The first is Betweenness centrality, a measurement of how often a given node lies on the shortest path between all other nodes. In plain terms, how much of the organization's information has no choice but to flow through this person. A figure with high betweenness need hold no title at all. They simply sit where the traffic must pass. The second instrument is the structural hole, a gap between two groups with no direct connection to each other. Whoever bridges that gap, who alone connects the two, captures a permanent advantage. They see both sides before either side sees the other, and they govern what crosses. Organizational network analysis has confirmed this repeatedly. Informal influence correlates only weakly with the formal hierarchy, and the most central connectors are very often mid-level. Knowing this, the countermeasure is not to admire the brokers. It is to become legible to them, and then to become one. 3 moves. Call it the shadow trace. Move 1. Backtrace. Take 3 real decisions that recently concluded in your domain. For each, reconstruct backward, not who signed the deck, but whose fingerprints are on the rough draft. Who was in the room? Whose read was sought? Build the actual consultation path of each. Move 2. Resolve. Lay the 3 traces over one another and find the names that recur. A node appearing in the consultation path of 3 unrelated decisions is not coincidence. That recurrence is Betweenness centrality, observed directly. You have now drawn a fragment of the shadow chart with evidence rather than gossip. And note the inconvenient geometry before the 3rd move. The most valuable position in any network is not the summit. It is the gap between 2 groups who do not speak to each other. No one is ever promoted into a gap. You can only occupy it deliberately, on your own initiative, while it is still open. Move 3. Bridge. Identify one structural hole near you. 2 groups that should be talking and are not. Engineering and the regional sales leads. The data team and the people who set strategy. Then become the connection, not by announcing it, but by routinely carrying useful, accurate information across the gap until both sides depend on you to do it. This is the only durable form of organizational power, because it is the one form a title cannot grant, and the loss of a title cannot remove. But execute this move carelessly, and the network will reject you. If you carry information across a gap as gossip or as a political maneuver, you are flagged as a threat. The system instantly isolates you. To bridge a structural hole safely, you must act not as a political whisperer, but as a frictionless translation layer. Every isolated department speaks its own dialect. Engineering speaks in system stability and debt. Sales speaks in contract value and velocity. The broker's leverage comes from translating the raw, unpolished pain of one group into the native KPIs of the other, before they ever meet in a formal room. You are not trading secrets. You are removing the tax that structural isolation levies on the company's speed. You become indispensable because you make the network legible to itself. Here is the shadow trace in operation. A director cannot get a platform investment approved. The visible chart says the decision belongs to the VP of engineering. She pitches the VP 3 times, immaculately, and stalls every time. So she runs the backtrace on 3 recently funded projects. One name recurs in all 3 consultation paths. Not an executive, but a principal engineer with no management line, whose technical read the VP treats as final. She resolves. The principal is the broker. She does not repitch the VP. She brings the principal a genuine problem from the sales data team, a group the principal never speaks to, and becomes the bridge across that hole. Within a quarter, her proposals stop stalling, not because her arguments improved, because she relocated herself in the structure. So the visible chart is a decoy. The real structure runs on access, and that access can be mapped, measured, and ultimately occupied. That resolves the question this analysis opened with. It also exposes a deeper one. Because we have only described how trust concentrates in these unranked nodes, we have not asked why it concentrates there. Why a particular principal engineer, a particular chief of staff, a particular quiet analyst becomes the person everyone defers to, while equally capable peers do not. That concentration is not random. It follows a mechanism as precise as the one you have just seen, and considerably less comfortable to look at directly. The mechanism by which institutions decide whom to favor. And favor, unlike merit, is allocated according to rules almost no one will say aloud. That is the structure beneath this one. The map you have learned to read shows you where the power sits. The next question is how it got there. We will trace it.